Understanding Judaism and Zionism, thanks to Israel SHAHAK's book, Jewish History, Jewish Religion, Chapter 4, The Weight of History, following, Anti-Jewish Persecutions, following. The general rule can be observed in all the major massacres of Jews in Christian Europe. During the First Crusade, it was not the proper armies of the knights, commanded by famous dukes and counts, which molested the Jews, but the spontaneous popular hosts composed almost exclusively of peasants and paupers in the wake of Peter the Hermit. In each city, the bishop or the emperor's representative opposed them and tried, often in vain, to protect the Jews. Note: examples can be found in any history of the Crusades. See especially Runciman, A History of the Crusades, Volume 1, Book 3, Chapter 1, The German Crusade. The subsequent defeat of this host by the Hungarian army to most Christians appeared as a just punishment meted out of high to the murderers of the Jews. End of note. The anti-Jewish riots in England, which accompanied the Third Crusade, were part of a popular movement directed also against royal officials. And some rioters were punished by Richard I. The massacres of Jews during the outbreaks of the Black Death occurred against the strict orders of the Pope, the Emperor, the bishops, and the German princes. In the free towns, for example, in Strasbourg, they were usually preceded by a local revolution in which the oligarchy town council, which protected the Jews, was overthrown and replaced by a more popular one. The great 1391 massacres of Jews in Spain took place under a feeble regency government, and at a time when the papacy, weakened by the great schism between competing popes, was unable to control the mendicant friars. Perhaps the most outstanding example is the great massacre of Jews during the Khmelnytsky revolt in the Ukraine, 1648, which started as a mutiny of Cossack officers, but soon turned into a widespread popular movement of the oppressed serfs. The unprivileged, the subjects, the Ukrainians, the Orthodox, persecuted by the Polish Catholic Church, were rising against their Catholic Polish masters, particularly against their masters' bailiffs, clergy, and Jews. Note: see John Stoy, Europe Unfolding, 1648-1688, Fontana, London, page 46. End of note. This typical peasant uprising against extreme oppression, an uprising accompanied not only by massacres committed by the rebels, but also by even more horrible atrocities and counter-terror of the Polish magnates' private armies, has remained emblazoned in the consciousness of East European Jews to this very day, not, however, as a peasant uprising, a revolt of the oppressed, of the real wretched of the earth, not even as a vengeance visited upon all the servants of the Polish nobility, but as an act of gratuitous anti-Semitism directed against Jews as such. Note: this latter feature is of course not mentioned by received Jewish historiography. The usual punishment for a rebellious or even impudent peasant was impalement. End of note. In fact, the voting of the Ukrainian delegation at the UN and more generally Soviet policies on the Middle East are often explained in the Israeli press as a heritage of Chmielnicki or of his descendants. Modern anti-Semitism. The character of anti-Jewish persecutions underwent a radical change in modern times. With the advent of the modern state, the abolition of serfdom, and the achievement of minimal individual rights, the special socio-economic function of the Jews necessarily disappears. Along with it, disappear also the powers of the Jewish community over its members. Individual Jews in growing numbers win the freedom to enter the general society of their countries. Naturally, this transition aroused a violent reaction both on the part of Jews, especially their rabbis, and of those elements in European society who opposed the open society and for whom the whole process of liberation of the individuals was anathema. Modern anti-Semitism appears first in France and Germany, then in Russia, after about 1870. Contrary to the prevalent opinion among Jewish socialists, I do not believe that its beginnings or its subsequent development until the present day can be ascribed to capitalism. On the contrary, in my opinion, the successful capitalists in all countries were on the whole remarkably free from anti-Semitism, and the countries in which capitalism was established first and in its most extensive form, such as England and Belgium, were also those where anti-Semitism was far less widespread than elsewhere. Note: the same can be observed in different regions of a given country. For example, in Germany, agrarian Bavaria was much more anti-Semitic than the industrialized areas. End of note. Early modern anti-Semitism, 1880-1900s, was a reaction of bewildered men who deeply hated modern society in all its aspects, both good and bad, and who were ardent believers in the conspiracy theory of history. The Jews were cast in the role of scapegoat for the breakup of the old society, which anti-Semitic nostalgia imagined as even more closed and ordered than it had ever been in reality. And for all that was disturbing in modern times. But right at the start, the anti-Semites were faced with what was for them a difficult problem. How to define this scapegoat, particularly in popular terms? What is to be the supposed common denominator of the Jewish musician, banker, craftsman, and beggar, especially after the common religious features had largely dissolved, at least externally? The theory of the Jewish race was the modern anti-Semitic answer to this problem. In contrast, The old Christian and even more so Muslim opposition to classical Judaism was remarkably free from racism. No doubt this was to some extent a consequence of the universal character of Christianity and Islam, as well as of their original connection with Judaism. Saint Thomas More repeatedly rebuked a woman who objected when he told her that the Virgin Mary was Jewish. But, in my opinion, a far more important reason was the social role of the Jews as an integral part of the upper classes. In many countries, Jews were treated as potential nobles, and upon conversion were able immediately to intermarry with the highest nobility. The nobility of the 15th century Castilian Aragon, or the aristocracy of 18th century Poland, to take the two cases where intermarriage with converted Jews was widespread, would hardly be likely to marry Spanish peasants or Polish serfs, no matter how much praise the gospel has for the poor.